Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Here we are, June 27th, attempting to move a budget forward to keep government working while we continue to negotiate a number of items in the weeks and months ahead. I agree with my colleague, the minority leader, that it is time to get serious about some very serious decisions. When this body was sworn in the first Tuesday in January, I talked a little bit about a concept that I learned in graduate school at Penn. The difference between a political scientist and a political actor. And I talked about how a political scientist, generally defined, were not just academics, but were folks who like to banter back and forth about public policy. They like to talk about how the world should be, how the world could be, if we lived in a utopian society and everybody agreed on the same definition of perfect, what and how things should operate. And then I talked a little bit about the political actor, the folks who debated public policy and talked about how the world could be, how the world should be, particularly if we could get everybody to agree on the same definition of perfect. But the main difference between the two was very simple. The political scientist had no responsibility for actually making decisions, whereas the political actor had to not just talk about how the world could be and should be, but had to actually make the decisions to make the world what it be. They had to make tough decisions. They had to make easy decisions. But they had to make decisions on public policy. Sometimes I feel like over the last several months, only one side of the aisle has stepped up to be political actors, while the other side has become complacent over the last 5 years in being political scientists. They have sat out the budget process for 5 years now. It is time for both sides to come to the table and be willing to make the tough decisions. It's always easy to find a reason to be no, particularly when somebody else will take the responsibility for governing. Our party and our side of the aisle has taken that responsibility. The closest we've gotten from the minority party to taking that responsibility is when several weeks ago, they introduced the first time the governor's spending proposal. They weren't willing to introduce the governor's tax package, so we had to actually do that ourselves for them. And when they attempted to bring the spending package to the floor, we reminded them that we are not Washington, D.C. We will not produce spending packages without the taxes to go with it, and required a vote on the tax package first. And lo and behold, when it came time to make a decision, when it came time to tell us how they were going to pay for their governor's spending package, each and every one of them voted no. So to stand up here today and act like we can have this utopian society where we can pay for every single thing of which we would like to spend, but somehow we don't have to have the taxes to go along with it, it's absurd. It's living in a fantasy world. It gets back to this philosophy that some people believe that somehow this Capitol is connected to a rainbow, and at the end of that rainbow, there is a pot of gold with a little leprechaun that is just chucking gold coins into that pot and will pay for these programs. That is just not true. That is how Washington, D.C. got into record deficits. That is how our country became a mess. That will not be how we operate Harrisburg under our watch. Now, if you look... As I've said before, we want to have a discussion on education. We are spending $27 billion on education in Pennsylvania. Basic public education, $27 billion. That is the 6th highest per pupil spending in the entire country. This budget, though, adds to that total. We had $200 million in educational investments, $100 million for basic education, K through 12, and we distribute it through the new basic education funding formula from the Commission's work over the last year. We had $30 million, a record amount, to early childhood education. We had $45 million to higher education as well. Look, as I said at the beginning, it's June 27th. This is not where I had hoped to be today. I had hoped to have a universal agreement with the governor, our colleagues across the aisle, and both parties in the Senate. But we're not there. The governor has alluded to progress being made. When we talk about public pension reform, I think it's accurate to say significant progress has been made in negotiations with the administration on public pension reform. The problem, though, outside of public pension reform, not a single item that the governor proposed in March has been taken off the table. Not a single one of the $5 billion in new taxes this year and $12 billion worth of new taxes next year. Not a single spending item has been taken off the table from the administration. Give and take is required in all facets of the budget process. We need to get about the business of having that discussion sooner rather than later. In the meantime, this government, this budget, while it may not be perfect, and perhaps we would all write it just a little bit differently, I probably would do so, and probably each of you as well. This budget gives us an opportunity to indeed keep government working while we continue negotiations. Our children, our human service agencies, our state and school district employees don't need to be held hostage to the budget process while we continue to wrangle over on some very difficult public policy issues that have been bantered about for decades. There is only one person who will be shutting down government in the weeks ahead, and that decision lies with the governor. He can very easily choose a couple lines to veto and continue the discussion forward. He can very easily choose not to interrupt the lives of everyday citizens while we get about the business of negotiating the next round of these budget discussions. We met our responsibility. We did so in a timely fashion. We are committed to a broad public policy debate going forward. But today, on this date, it's time to keep government working while those discussions continue. I would ask the members to support House Bill 1192. Thank you.